The pen was already waiting on top of the sale papers when my daughter pushed them across the table. Not after dinner. Not in private. Right there, in the middle of Rebecca's housewarming party, with wine glasses still half full and neighbors pretending not to stare. My name is Margaret Ellis. I am 68 years old. And that paper was for the little Lavender farm my late husband and I had protected for 40 years. Rebecca stood across from me in her cream-colored dress, smiling like this was ordinary. "Mom," she said, "just sign it. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." That should have been my first warning. Evan, my son-in-law, did not look at my face. He watched my hand. More specifically, he watched the fingers I had wrapped around the pen. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave your city or state in the comments, because that night, I felt more alone than I had in years. Then Rebecca said the words I still hear when the house gets too quiet. "That farm is dead weight." The room changed. No one gasped. No one defended me. A fork touched a plate somewhere near the kitchen island, and then even that sound stopped. Dead weight. Not my home. Not the land where her father taught her to ride a bicycle between rows of lavender. Not the place I kept because my husband made me promise I would never sell under pressure. Just dead weight. I looked at my daughter, waiting for her to soften. She didn't. Evan cleared his throat and tapped the bottom of the document. "The buyer needs an answer tonight," he said. "If we wait, we lose the offer." There it was. Tonight. I should have asked why the deadline felt so convenient. I should have asked why the documents were already printed, clipped, and marked with yellow tabs. I should have asked why my name was spelled correctly on every page, as if someone had prepared this long before the party began. But I only looked down. The signature line was waiting for me. Margaret Ellis. My own name looked strange there. Rebecca leaned closer. "Mom, everyone knows you can't keep that place forever. Evan is only trying to help." Trying to help. That was another warning. Across the room, my 12-year-old granddaughter, Clara, sat with a paper plate on her lap. She had stopped eating. Her eyes were fixed on me, wide and frightened, like she understood something the adults were pretending not to see. I wanted to tell her I was all right. I wasn't. My hand moved toward the pen, and Evan's shoulders loosened just a little. That tiny breath told me more than his words did. He needed my signature. Not tomorrow. Not after I slept on it. Tonight. And then, from somewhere deep in memory, I heard my husband's voice. Quiet. Tired. Certain. "Margaret, don't ever sign when someone is rushing you." I had forgotten that sentence for years. Or maybe I had buried it. Along with the old bank envelope in his locked drawer. The one with Mr. Dalton's name on the card. I did not understand then why that mattered. But Evan did not know about that envelope. Rebecca did not know either. So I set the pen down. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't call my daughter cruel, though the words sat heavy in my mouth. I only stood up, smoothed the front of my dress, and looked once at Clara. Then I walked out of my daughter's beautiful new house without signing a single page. And by the time I reached my car, one name was already turning in my mind. Mr. Dalton. The bank manager my husband had trusted with the file Rebecca thought was just old paperwork. When I first bought that little lavender farm with my husband, Rebecca used to tell everyone where she lived. As a little girl, she would point toward the purple fields and say, "That's my home." Somewhere along the way, that stopped. Years later, whenever someone asked where I lived, Rebecca would smile politely and say, "Mom lives outside town." She never mentioned the farm anymore. At first, I told myself she was simply making conversation easier. Then I convinced myself she didn't want strangers asking questions. Mothers become very good at making excuses for the people they love. Looking back, I think I was making excuses for myself. The farm had never embarrassed her when she was young. It only became something she hid after success began to matter more than memories. That realization hurt far more than hearing her call it dead weight. When I arrived at Rebecca's new house that evening, everything looked perfect. Fresh flowers. White walls. Expensive furniture. Every detail seemed carefully chosen to impress the guests walking through the front door. She proudly showed everyone the kitchen, the living room, the backyard, and the view. She never once mentioned the place where she had grown up. When someone asked if she had always lived in Oregon, she laughed softly. "Oh, my mom still lives outside the city." That was all. Outside the city. Not on the farm where her father worked from sunrise until dark. Not on the land where birthdays, Christmas mornings, and summer evenings had filled our lives. Just outside the city. I smiled anyway. I had learned that correcting someone in front of guests rarely changed anything. It only made people uncomfortable. Evan eventually joined us with 2 glasses of wine in his hands. He handed one to another guest and nodded toward me. "You know," he said casually, "that property is probably worth more than Margaret realizes." Someone agreed. Another guest mentioned rising land prices. Evan smiled. "Sometimes holding on to old land doesn't make sense anymore. It's just sleeping money." Sleeping money. The words sounded practical. Reasonable, even. But he wasn't talking about land. He was talking about my home. I watched him carefully for the first time that evening. His smile never disappeared. Neither did his interest in the farm. Every conversation somehow circled back to it. The value. The market. The buyers. The timing. It should have sounded like ordinary financial advice. Instead, it sounded rehearsed. That feeling stayed with me. Then another memory quietly returned. One summer evening, years before he passed away, my husband and I sat between the lavender rows as the sun disappeared behind the hills. He reached for my hand and said something I didn't fully understand back then. "Promise me something." I laughed and asked, "What now?" "If anyone ever tries to rush you into selling this place, don't." I asked him why. He only smiled. "One day you'll understand." At the time, I thought he was simply being sentimental. Now, sitting alone with those memories, I wasn't so sure anymore. For the first time in years, I found myself wondering whether my husband had seen a danger that I never had. And if he had, what else had he prepared before he was gone? Evan was the first one to mention the buyer again. He did it quietly, almost gently, like he was trying to sound reasonable in front of everyone. "The offer won't stay open," he said. "They need an answer tonight." Tonight. That word settled over the table like a weight. Rebecca folded her arms and looked at me as if I were the only person standing between her and a better life. "Mom, please," she said. "Don't ruin this because you're attached to an old place." An old place. I looked at the papers again. The yellow tabs were lined up neatly along the side. Sign here. Initial here. Date here. It was too organized. Too ready. I told myself not to panic, but something inside me had gone very still. I turned the first page just enough to see the date near the bottom. It had been prepared 3 days before the party. 3 days. Not that afternoon. Not after some sudden conversation. 3 days before Rebecca ever looked me in the eye and asked me to sign. That was when I understood. This party had never been just a party. It was a room full of witnesses. Rebecca leaned closer, lowering her voice but not enough. Everyone is trying to help you. You're making this harder than it has to be. I wanted to ask her when she and Evan had decided for me. I wanted to ask how many conversations had happened behind my back. But I didn't. Because if I opened my mouth too quickly, I knew my voice would break. Then Evan slid one page forward with 2 fingers. It's only practical, Margaret. The market is strong. Holding it longer doesn't make sense. Only practical. That was the word people used when they wanted you to stop feeling. And for one terrible second, I almost believed them. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe I was holding too tightly to something that belonged to the past. Maybe Rebecca was right, and I was only making everyone uncomfortable. Then I heard my husband's voice. Not loudly. Not like a memory from a movie. Just clear enough to stop my hand. Margaret, don't ever sign when someone is rushing you. I looked down at the pen. My fingers had already moved toward it. I pulled my hand back. Rebecca noticed. Her face changed before she could hide it. Mom. Just one word. But there was warning in it. I looked at her, then at Evan, then at the little yellow tabs waiting for my initials. And another image came back to me. A white bank envelope. A locked drawer. The word preservation printed across the top of a page I had never fully understood. And a small business card with Mr. Dalton's name on it. I didn't know what it meant yet. But I knew enough to stop. I need time, I said. The room went quiet again. Rebecca stared at me as if I had slapped her. Time for what? To read what you're asking me to sign. Evan's smile stayed on his face, but it no longer reached his eyes. We've already gone through it, he said. That was the moment my heart hardened just enough to protect me. Not against my daughter. Against the pressure. I placed the pen beside the papers. I'm not signing tonight. For the first time all evening, Evan looked at my face. And the color drained from his. The road home felt longer than it had ever been. I drove through the dark without turning on the radio. The only sound inside the truck was the soft hum of the engine and my own breathing. Rebecca's words refused to leave me. Dead weight. I had spent 40 years believing that little Lavender farm was the strongest part of our family. Tonight, I learned my daughter saw it as the thing holding her back. I stopped at a red light and caught my own reflection in the windshield. For the first time, I stopped pretending everything between us would somehow heal on its own. That hope had carried me for years. Now it felt as worn out as the faded work gloves still lying on the passenger seat. Yet one face kept returning to me. Clara. She never spoke a single word during the party, but I couldn't forget the way she looked at me. She wasn't confused. She was frightened. Not because of the papers. Because she knew I was being cornered. I wondered whether staying quiet had protected my family. Or whether my silence had only made it easier for people to decide my future without me. By the time I reached the farm, the porch light was still glowing, just as I had left it. The old kitchen greeted me with familiar silence. Everything was exactly where it had always been. The wooden table. The kettle beside the stove. The worn chair my husband always used after working outside. Nothing in that room looked valuable. Yet every corner carried a memory no buyer could ever measure. I hung my keys on the small hook beside the door. The farm key swung gently before becoming still. Rebecca had called this place old. She had never called it home anymore. I rested my hand on the back of my husband's chair and closed my eyes. Losing him had been the hardest day of my life. but losing my daughter little by little. I wasn't sure I knew how to survive that. Then another memory surfaced. Not of his voice this time. Of the drawer. The one he always locked before going to bed. He had never hidden money from me. Never secrets either. Only documents he insisted would matter someday. At the time, I smiled and told him he worried too much. Now I wasn't so certain. My phone buzzed softly against the table. A single message. It wasn't from Rebecca. It wasn't from Evan. It was from Clara. Only 3 words. I love you. Nothing more. No explanation. No questions. Just those 3 words. My eyes filled before I realized I was crying. That little message couldn't change what had happened. It couldn't erase the humiliation. But it reminded me that someone had seen the truth. Someone still believed me. I wiped my face, took a slow breath, and walked toward our bedroom. The old dresser stood exactly where it always had. My husband's watch still rested on top. Inside the bottom drawer was the small brass key he had once placed in my hand. "Don't lose this," he had said with a smile. I had almost forgotten it. Almost. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the narrow drawer beneath the bookshelf. The hinges creaked after years of silence. Inside lay a single white bank envelope, untouched by time. I picked it up carefully. The paper felt heavier than it should have. On the front was a business card, yellowed with age. Only one name was printed beneath the bank's logo. Mr. Dalton. I stared at it for a long time, knowing my husband had expected this moment long before I ever did. I carried the white bank envelope to the kitchen table as though it might fall apart if I held it too tightly. For years it had rested in my husband's locked drawer without a single question from me. Now it felt as if he had been waiting beside me all along. The paper had yellowed with age. My name was written across the front in my husband's careful handwriting. Underneath, in smaller letters, were 2 words that made my heart slow. Preservation file. I whispered them aloud. Preservation. Not sale. Not inheritance. Preservation. Whatever this was, my husband had never intended it to be opened casually. He had meant for me to find it only when something precious was truly at risk. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were several neatly organized documents, a short handwritten note telling me to stay calm, and a business card with Mr. Dalton's name beneath the bank's logo. I stared at that name again. Then I turned the first page. Across the top, in bold letters, were words I had never seen before. Asset Protection Review. I read the title twice. It sounded formal. Legal. Important. But it also sounded like something far beyond anything my husband and I had ever discussed. I slowly continued reading until another sentence stopped me. It referred to property decisions made under pressure. Under pressure. My fingers tightened around the page. How could my husband have anticipated something like this? What had he known that I never asked about? The answers weren't there. Only more questions. Before I could read another page, my phone lit up. Rebecca. I let it ring until it stopped. A second later another message appeared. Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Then another. The buyers are waiting. Evan says we may lose everything if you delay. Lose everything. I looked from the screen to the documents lying beside me. For the first time that night, guilt and doubt pulled against each other. Part of me wanted to call my daughter. Part of me wanted to drive back and apologize simply to end the conflict. Instead, I turned the phone over. The messages could wait. The truth could not. The following morning I walked across the road to visit Mrs. Whitmore. She had lived next to our farm longer than anyone else. When she opened the door, she took one look at my face and invited me inside without asking a question. After I told her what had happened, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Your husband came by my house more than once before he passed," she said. "He always said he was going into town to see someone at the bank." "The bank?" She smiled sadly. I never asked why. But I remember one thing very clearly. "What was that?" "He said he hoped you would never need those papers." A chill ran through me. Mrs. Whitmore reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. "Margaret, your farm carried more families through hard years than most people ever knew. Don't let anyone convince you it was just another piece of land." I left her house with tears in my eyes. Not because I was frightened anymore. Because someone besides me still remembered. Back at home, I picked up Mr. Dalton's business card. The number was still printed clearly beneath his name. I hesitated only once before dialing. The receptionist answered almost immediately. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Dalton," I said. There was a brief pause. Then she replied, "Mr. Dalton is still with us. He has an opening tomorrow morning if you're available." Available. I closed my eyes for a moment. "Yes," I answered quietly. "I'll be there." When the call ended, I slipped the preservation file back into its envelope and held it against my chest. I was afraid of what I might learn. I was even more afraid of what that truth might do to my relationship with Rebecca. But pretending nothing had happened was no longer possible. I picked up my keys, tucked the envelope safely beneath my arm, locked the front door behind me, and walked toward my truck. For the first time since the papers had been pushed across the table, I wasn't driving away from something. I was driving toward the truth. The next morning, I arrived at the bank 10 minutes early. I sat in my truck with the envelope on my lap, watching people walk in and out through the glass doors. They looked ordinary. Calm. Like nothing inside that building could possibly change a family. But my hands knew better. They kept tightening around the edge of the preservation file. When I finally stepped inside, the receptionist looked up from her desk. "Mrs. Ellis?" I nodded. "Mr. Dalton is expecting you." Hearing my name in that quiet bank lobby made my stomach tighten. Not because I was afraid of the man waiting for me, but because my husband had somehow connected this place to a day I never wanted to face. Mr. Dalton stood when I entered his office. He was older than I expected, with silver hair and kind eyes that sharpened the moment he saw the envelope in my hands. "Margaret Ellis," he said softly. "I knew your husband." For a second, I couldn't speak. Then I placed the envelope on his desk. His expression changed when he saw the words on the front. Preservation file. He didn't touch it right away. He only sat back slowly, as if the past had just walked into the room with me. "I hoped you would never need this," he said. Those words nearly broke me. Because Mrs. Whitmore had said the same thing. Mr. Dalton opened the envelope with care, the way someone handles something that still carries another person's intentions. He read the first page in silence. Then the second. Finally, he looked at me. "Your husband was concerned that one day you might be pressured into selling the farm." The room seemed to narrow around me. Pressured by who? He hesitated. He didn't name a person. He named a situation. My throat tightened. What situation? A family member pushing for a sale that did not serve your interests. I looked down at my hands. So it had not been my imagination. It had not been grief making me suspicious. My husband had seen something possible long before I had the courage to see it happening. Mr. Dalton turned the document toward me and pointed to a paragraph. This clause allows the bank to request review before any sale proceeds if there is evidence of coercion, undue pressure, or use of the property to satisfy another person's personal debt. Another person's personal debt. The words stayed in the air. I thought of Evan's urgency. The yellow tabs. The buyer waiting tonight. Rebecca saying everyone was trying to help me. What does that mean? I asked. It means the sale can be paused, he said. Not cancelled by me. Not decided by me. But paused until the circumstances are reviewed. Hope came so suddenly I almost didn't trust it. So I'm not trapped? No, Mrs. Ellis. But the file only protects you if you are willing to stand by it. If stories about quiet strength, family, and justice mean something to you, I'd be honored if you subscribed before we continue, because the most important part of this story is still ahead. Then Mr. Dalton turned another page. This one had notes attached to it. His eyes moved across the paper, then stopped. I watched his face change. What is it? I asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he pulled a second folder from the side of his desk and checked something against the document in front of him. That silence frightened me more than any answer could have. Finally, he said, your son-in-law's name appears in the review notes. My heart dropped. Evan? Yes. Why would Evan's name be in my husband's file? Mr. Dalton folded his hands on the desk. I need to be careful with what I say. But there are financial concerns connected to him that may explain why he wanted this sale to happen quickly. I thought of Rebecca then. Not the Rebecca who had humiliated me. The little girl who once ran barefoot between lavender rows. If Evan had pulled her into something, then the truth would not only hurt me. It would hurt her too. Mr. Dalton's voice softened. Mrs. Ellis, I can show you what the review allows. But I cannot choose what you do with it. I looked at the file. Then I looked at the man my husband had trusted. For years, I had kept peace by swallowing my own pain. But peace built on pressure was not peace. It was surrender. I thought of Clara's message. I thought of Rebecca's face when I refused to sign. And I thought of my husband locking that drawer night after night, hoping I would never need what he had left inside. I understand, I said. My voice was quiet, but it did not shake. Please show me everything. Mr. Dalton turned the folder toward me, but he kept one hand resting on the edge of it. Before I show you this, he said, I need you to understand something. Your husband did not create this file to punish anyone. I nodded, though my throat had tightened. He created it to protect the farm. Then he pointed to a line near the bottom of the page. There was Evan's name. Not in large print. Not circled. Just typed neatly into a review note connected to business debt. For a moment, I could not move. How much? I asked. Mr. Dalton looked at me carefully. Enough to explain the urgency, he said. Over $2 million in business debt, several lenders already demanding payment, and one deadline that matched the date on the sales contract. If the sale had gone through before this review, Mr. Dalton continued, those proceeds could have been traced into obligations connected to Mr. Evans' financial exposure. Your farm might have disappeared in weeks, and recovering it afterward would have been extraordinarily difficult. For a moment, I could not breathe. $2 million. Not a small mistake. Not a late bill. A hole deep enough to swallow my farm, my daughter's future, and Clara's childhood if I had signed those papers. I finally understood that this had never been about helping me simplify my life. It had been about moving my family's last protected asset before anyone realized why it was suddenly so urgent. He did not need to say more. But it was enough. The deadline. The yellow tabs. The buyer waiting that very night. None of it had been about helping me simplify my life. Evan did not just need money. He needed my farm turned into cash before anyone could ask where that cash was going. I sat back slowly, feeling anger rise through the shock. Not loud anger. Not the kind that makes you scream. The kind that makes your hands go cold. So Rebecca didn't know? I asked. Mr. Dalton hesitated. I cannot say what she knew. I can only say the pressure to sell appears connected to financial strain that did not belong to you. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Because for the first time, I saw my daughter differently. Yes, she had humiliated me. Yes, she had called my home dead weight. But maybe Evan had been whispering fear into her ear long before that party. Maybe he had made her believe selling the farm would save them both. When Rebecca arrived at the bank later that morning, Evan was with her. Her face was tight. His was harder. What is this? Rebecca asked, looking from me to Mr. Dalton. Mom, why are we here? I held the envelope in my lap. Because there are things your husband didn't tell you. Evan laughed once, sharp and bitter. This is ridiculous. Mr. Dalton did not react. He simply said, Mr. Evan, the bank is reviewing whether the proposed sale involves outside financial pressure. Rebecca turned to him. Outside financial pressure? Evan's jaw moved, but no words came out right away. That silence did what no accusation could have done. It made Rebecca afraid. Evan, she whispered, what is he talking about? He looked at me then. Not with guilt. With blame. This is what she does, he said. She controls everything. She's turning you against me. If this sale falls apart, don't blame me for what happens next. There was a time when those words would have crushed me. That morning, they only made things clearer. Clara was not supposed to be there, but she came in behind Rebecca, still wearing her school sweater. She must have heard enough from the hallway, because she stopped beside the door and looked straight at me. Not ashamed. Not confused. Just sad. And in that sadness, I saw something I needed. She understood. Rebecca followed Clara's eyes back to me. For the first time since the party, my daughter did not look embarrassed by me. She looked uncertain. For one painful moment, I wondered how many nights she had gone to bed believing the only way to save her marriage was to convince her own mother to surrender everything. Mr. Dalton closed the folder gently. The preservation file gives the bank grounds to pause the sale while coercion and debt-related influence are reviewed, he said. Evan stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. You can't do that. Mr. Dalton's voice stayed calm. I am not doing anything beyond what the file allows. Evan turned to Rebecca. Say something. But Rebecca did not. She was staring at the papers now, as if they had become a mirror. And I knew the sale had begun to collapse. Not because I shouted. Not because I won. Because the truth had finally entered the room. I placed both hands on the envelope and took one steady breath. For 40 years, I had protected that farm with silence. Now I was ready to protect it with one word. No. Mr. Dalton placed one hand on the preservation file and looked at everyone in the room. The bank has enough grounds to pause the sale, he said. Evan stared at him. Pause it, he repeated. Yes, Mr. Dalton said. The clause is active. The words landed quietly, but they changed everything. No one shouted. No one slammed a door. Still, I felt the room shift. For the first time since the papers had been pushed across that party table, I was not the one being cornered. Evan looked from Mr. Dalton to me, then to Rebecca. "This is ridiculous," he said. "A bank can't just interfere because an old woman changed her mind." I flinched at old woman. But only for a second. Mr. Dalton did not. "The bank is not interfering," he said. "It is following the review process your wife's father established before his passing." Rebecca's face changed at the mention of her father. That was the first time I saw the words reach her. Not legal terms. Not property language. Her father. The man who had built that farm with blistered hands and quiet patience. Mr. Dalton turned one page and continued. "The property cannot move forward to sale while there is evidence that the decision may be connected to pressure, coercion, or another person's personal debt." Evan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. That silence told Rebecca more than any confession could have. She looked at him slowly. "Personal debt?" she asked. He shook his head too quickly. "Don't listen to this. They're twisting it." But he no longer sounded certain. And Rebecca heard that too. Then Mr. Dalton explained the part that broke her. "The farm had not been protected because my husband distrusted family. It had been protected because he understood how fear could make good people cruel. He knew that when money got tight, someone might look at the land and stop seeing the love buried in it. He knew someone might call survival practical. He knew someone might call a home dead weight." Rebecca lowered her eyes. The phrase sat between us again. Dead weight. I did not repeat it. I did not need to. She remembered. Everyone did. That little farm had paid for school shoes when money was short. It had fed neighbors during bad winters. It had given Rebecca a childhood full of open air, safe mornings, and a father who came home smelling of earth and lavender. And now it had stopped Evan from turning her mother's home into cash for a $2 million problem he had hidden from her. Mr. Dalton looked at Rebecca and said the words that finally broke through every excuse in the room. "Your mother's farm was not standing between you and a better life. It was standing between your family and financial ruin." Rebecca pressed one hand against her mouth. "Mom," she whispered. I looked at her, but I did not rescue her from the silence. For most of my life, I had softened every hard moment for my child. That morning, I let the truth do what I never could. Evan stood suddenly. "You're all acting like I stole something," he said. "I was trying to fix this family." "No," Rebecca said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. "You were trying to fix yourself." He turned toward her. "Rebecca, don't do this." But she stepped back. Just one step. It was small. But it was enough. For the first time, she was not standing behind him. Mr. Dalton closed the folder. "The sale cannot proceed under these conditions," he said. "Not while there is evidence that the proceeds could be redirected toward debts Mrs. Ellis never agreed to carry." All eyes moved to me. I felt the weight of them. Rebecca's shame. Evan's anger. Clara's quiet hope from the doorway. And my husband's invisible hand, steady on my shoulder. I placed both palms flat on the table. My farm is not for sale. And it never was responsible for debts it did not create. No one moved. So I said it again, softer. It is not for sale. Evan looked as if the floor had disappeared beneath him. Rebecca looked like she wanted to cry, but did not think she had the right. And I felt something inside me settle. Not happiness. Not victory. Relief. There was no pleasure in watching my daughter understand how deeply she had hurt me. There was no joy in seeing Evan exposed. But there was dignity in finally refusing to be pushed. I gathered the preservation file and slipped it back into the envelope. Rebecca took one step toward me. Mom, she stopped there. Maybe she did not know how to apologize. Maybe she knew one sentence could never repair what had happened. Clara moved closer to me, not touching my hand, just standing near enough that I could feel she was there. That was enough for the moment. I looked at Rebecca. I love you, I said. But love does not mean signing away my life because you are uncomfortable with where you came from. Her eyes filled. I did not wait for an answer. Some doors should not be slammed shut. But they should not be held open by the person who was hurt either. I walked out of the bank with the envelope under my arm. The farm was still mine. And for the first time in a long time, so was my voice. The next morning, I walked out to the lavender rows before the sun had fully cleared the hills. The air was cool. The soil was damp beneath my shoes. For the first time in days, no one was asking me to sign anything. No one was telling me what made sense. No one was calling this place a burden. It was just quiet. I stood between the rows and held the preservation file against my chest. My husband had not only protected the land. He had protected me. He had known there might come a day when love would be used against me. When my fear of losing my daughter might make me forget my own worth. When keeping the peace might cost me the only home we had built together. I used to think he had left me paperwork. Now I understood. He had left me courage. A little after 9, I saw Clara walking up the gravel path. She had a small backpack over one shoulder and her hair pulled back messily, like Rebecca had done it in a hurry. For a second, she stood at the edge of the field without speaking. Then she said, "Grandma?" Just that one word nearly undid me. I smiled as best I could. "Come here, sweetheart." She walked into my arms and held on tightly. Not the polite kind of hug children give when adults tell them to. A real one. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I heard Mom say it," Clara said. "About the farm." I closed my eyes. She was angry. Clara pulled back and looked at the rows of lavender behind me. "It doesn't feel like dead weight." Those words settled somewhere deep in my heart. No apology from Rebecca could have reached me the way that sentence did. Because Clara had seen what everyone else had missed. This place was not just land. It was shelter. Memory. Proof that love could stay rooted, even when people forgot where they came from. Later that day, Rebecca sent a message. Not a long one. Just 3 words. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. My first instinct was to answer immediately. That is what I had always done. Run toward her pain. Soften her guilt. Make the hard moment easier for her, even when I was the one bleeding. But this time, I set the phone down. Not because I stopped loving my daughter. Because I finally understood that love without boundaries had nearly cost me everything. I would talk to Rebecca one day. Maybe soon. Maybe after she had time to sit with what she had done. But I would not carry the whole bridge alone anymore. That evening, I sat on the porch with Clara beside me. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and we watched the wind move through the lavender. For the first time since the party, I felt peace. Not the old kind. Not the kind that comes from keeping everyone comfortable. A different kind. The kind that comes when you stop begging people to value what you know is sacred. I still loved Rebecca. I always would. But I would never again let anyone call my life's work a burden just because they wanted something from it. Because love is never a burden. Exploitation is. If you've ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and keeping the peace, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments. I read every one.